There is a piece of film sitting in a vault somewhere that Hollywood never wanted you to find. It is a scene from one of the most famous movies ever made. It was shot, paid for, and then quietly buried 2 days before the world ever got to see the film. And the reason it was hidden will completely change how you think about one of cinema's greatest heroes. We are talking about Casablanca, the 1942 classic that has been called the most perfect movie Hollywood ever produced. The film that gave the world Humphrey Bogart as the cool, mysterious, brooding Rick Blaine. The man who pretended he did not care about anyone. The man who said he would never stick his neck out for nobody. But here is the thing nobody tells you. There was a moment captured on camera where Rick was not cool. He was not mysterious. He was not noble. He was cold, greedy, and calculating. And the people who made this movie panicked when they realized what they had done. So they cut it. They locked it away. And for decades, almost nobody talked about it. But that is not the only secret buried inside Casablanca. Because once you start pulling on this thread, you realize the entire making of this movie was one long string of hidden scenes, forbidden moments, and decisions made in absolute desperation. This is the real story. And it is far more fascinating than anything they put on screen. Let us go back to the very beginning, because this story does not start on a Hollywood set. It starts in 1938 in the middle of one of the darkest moments in European history. A school teacher from America named Murray Burnett traveled to Vienna with his wife. They were not there for vacation. They were there to help their Jewish relatives find a way to get their money out of Austria, which had fallen under Nazi control. The danger was real. The fear was everywhere. And Burnett was watching it all unfold with his own eyes. After Vienna, Burnett and his wife stopped in a small town in the south of France. And one night, they wandered into a little nightclub near the water. What Burnett saw inside that club stopped him cold. There was a black pianist playing jazz music. And sitting around listening to that music was the most unlikely crowd you could imagine. French locals, Nazi officers, Jewish refugees, all in the same room, all pretending, for just a few hours, that the world outside did not exist. That image never left Burnett. It stayed with him like a photograph burned into his memory. When he got back home to America, Burnett sat down with a writer named Joan Allison, and they spent the summer of 1940 turning that memory into a play. They called it Everybody Comes to Rick's. In the play, Rick was not the smooth, mysterious loner from the movie. He was a lawyer. He had left a family behind. And the woman at the center of the story, who would eventually become Ilsa, was bold and openly flirty in ways that made Broadway producers very uncomfortable. The play had a fierce anti-Nazi message, but nobody in New York wanted to touch it. The rejections came one after another. And then something lucky happened. The play found its way to Warner Brothers in Hollywood. The exact day it arrived at the studio was the day after Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. December 8, 1941. America had just entered the war. And suddenly a story about love, sacrifice, and standing up against fascism felt very, very timely. A sharp story editor named Irene Diamond read it immediately and called it sophisticated hokum, which was her way of saying it was dramatic, entertaining, and exactly what people needed right now. Warner Brothers bought the play for $20,000. That was an absolutely staggering amount of money for an unproduced script by two writers nobody had ever heard of. Hollywood was buzzing about whether they had lost their minds. But here is something that will surprise you. Even after spending that kind of money, Warner Brothers did not think they were making anything special. For them, this was just another movie on a very busy schedule. And the man they cast to carry the whole thing, Humphrey Bogart, felt exactly the same way. Bogart made 4 films in 1942. Casablanca was just one of them. He did not think it was going to be any different from the rest. Ingrid Bergman, who played Ilsa, only took the role because the movie she actually wanted to make fell through. She was not even her first choice for the part. Warner Brothers had originally wanted someone else entirely. Now here is where things get truly chaotic. When filming started on May 25, 1942, the script was not finished. Not mostly finished. Not almost finished. Genuinely, actually not finished. The writers were scrambling so hard that pages were being written at night and rushed to the set the next morning while the cameras were already being set up. Actors were walking onto set without knowing what they were about to say, or more importantly, what their character actually wanted. Scenes were rewritten 7 times in a single day. The movie grew so long that by August the producer Hal B. Wallace was in a panic, demanding pages be cut. And in that chaos, something magical started happening. Humphrey Bogart, frustrated and improvising, looked at Ingrid Bergman one afternoon and said, "Here's looking at you, kid." That line was not in any script. It never appeared on any page. He just said it. And the director kept rolling. Meanwhile, the most famous closing line in movie history, "Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship," was not filmed at all during production. Wallace thought of it after filming had already wrapped. He liked it so much that he paid Bogart $50,000 to come back to the studio and record just that one single line. But none of the chaos was harder on anyone than Ingrid Bergman. Because Bergman had a problem that no actor should ever have to deal with. She did not know how her story ended. She did not know if Ilsa would leave with Rick or leave with her husband Victor Laszlo. She asked the director Michael Curtiz again and again. His answer, every single time, was, "I don't know, we will figure it out." So Bergman did the only thing she could. She played every scene somewhere in the middle. Never too much love for one man. Never too little. Just this aching, beautiful uncertainty that audiences felt without ever being able to name what it was. For the famous airport scene at the very end, Bergman had 2 complete outfits hanging in her dressing room. A glamorous fur coat for if Ilsa stayed with Rick, and a plain travel suit for if she left with Laszlo. She did not know which one to put on until minutes before the camera rolled. She later laughed about it, saying she spent more time worrying about the coat than about the actual acting. The crew voted on the ending, and the final decision was made just days before the film opened. And then there was the director himself. Michael Curtiz was a brilliant Hungarian filmmaker who spoke English with such a thick accent that he caused constant confusion on set. He once asked for a poodle, and someone brought him a dog. He meant puddle for a rain scene. He told Bogart to make love to her with your hat on, and then added, in total seriousness, "You know, like an American." He shouted, "Bring in the empty people," when he wanted background extras. Nobody knew what he meant. But somehow, out of all this beautiful confusion, one of the greatest films ever made was born. Now, here is the scene that was never supposed to exist. Buried in the production records, hidden in old studio memos, is the story of a scene that cost $8,000 to shoot, ran over 2 minutes long, and was cut from the film just 48 hours before it premiered. 2 days. They pulled it 2 days before the world was going to see it for the first time. The scene takes place in a dark jail cell. Victor Laszlo, the heroic resistance leader, sits imprisoned, and Rick Blaine walks in to see him. But Rick does not walk in to rescue him. He does not walk in out of kindness or sympathy or even guilt. Rick walks in with a business offer. Rick has the letters of transit. Those documents are the most valuable things in all of Casablanca. They could guarantee Laszlo's freedom. They could get him out of the country and away from the Nazis. And Rick offers them to Laszlo. But there is a catch. A brutal one. Rick wants 100,000 francs. That is an amount worth almost $2 million in today's money. He is asking a man sitting in a jail cell, a man who has survived concentration camps, a man who has dedicated his life to fighting evil, to pay through the nose for his own escape. Laszlo looks at him and asks why. Why would you do this? And Rick looks back at him and delivers one of the coldest lines ever written for a Hollywood hero. He says there are 2 kinds of people in this world. Those who stick their necks out and those who profit by it. I have had my neck out a couple of times. I am now in the profit-taking business. Read that again. The man audiences were falling in love with. The man they were rooting for. The man who everyone believed had a good heart underneath all that armor. That man was sitting in a dark room trying to squeeze a fortune out of someone fleeing for his life. This scene was not a mistake. It was written deliberately. It was filmed deliberately. It cost real money to produce. But when the studio showed the film to a test audience, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. People did not like this version of Rick at all. They felt something was wrong. Something was broken. This was not the hero they had been promised. The producer Hal B. Wallace wrote about it in a memo that has survived all these years. He said the scene tips our hand. It gives away too much about Rick too early. It removes the mystery. And without the mystery, the whole emotional engine of the movie stalls. Because the reason audiences connect so deeply to Casablanca is the question that hangs over every scene. What will Rick do? What does he really feel? Is there something still alive inside this man who says he cares about nothing? The jail scene answered that question too soon. And it answered it badly. So they cut it. They cut $8,000 worth of film 2 days before the premiere, and they never looked back. And the movie became timeless. But the jail scene was not the only footage that disappeared. There was another scene, lighter in tone but equally revealing, that also vanished before audiences ever had a chance to see it. This one involved Sasha, the bartender, and a German officer sitting at Rick's bar. The officer was boastful and arrogant, announcing loudly that he could handle any drink in the world. Sasha, completely straight-faced, mixed him something that had no right to exist in a glass. Strong rum, absinthe, and gunpowder. He slid it across the bar. The officer picked it up and drank the whole thing in one go. For a moment he looked proud of himself. Then his eyes rolled back in his head and he crashed face-first onto the bar. The entire cafe went dead silent. Rick watched from across the room, barely allowing himself the smallest smile before turning away and going back to his drink. Bogart loved this scene. He fought to keep it in the film. He believed it showed something important about Rick, that underneath the neutrality and the careful distance, Rick was quietly on the right side all along. His stillness was not indifference. It was strategy. But the film was already running long. The censors had strict rules about showing too much alcohol and about making military officers look foolish. And the studio was nervous about how audiences in neutral countries might react. So the scene was cut. And Rick's quiet smile of approval went with it. Meanwhile, back in the offices of Warner Brothers, a man named Joseph Breen was making sure that everything else in the movie was being sanitized within an inch of its life. Breen was in charge of Hollywood's production code. His job was to protect moral standards in American films. And he had enormous problems with Casablanca. He sent the studio a memo on December 3, 1941 listing 13 separate things he wanted changed. 13. He demanded that every hint of a brothel operating above Rick's cafe be removed. He forced them to change Rick's line, "What in hell are you doing here?" to simply, "What are you doing here?" He found the word broad too offensive and had it cut from the script entirely. He insisted that Ingrid Bergman's costumes show less of her neckline. He rewrote the scene between Captain Reno and a desperate woman seeking an exit visa. In the original script, Reno's intentions were unmistakable. Breen stripped all of that out and replaced it with something vague. He even took issue with a bartender's line about his boss going to bed and changed it to going home to avoid what he considered a sexual implication. He also attacked the heart of the film itself, the love story between Rick and Ilsa. In the original script, it was completely clear that the two of them had been lovers in Paris. There was even a scene that showed them together. Breen called this unacceptable and issued a memo on January 6, 1942 stating there should be no suggestion of intimacy between Rick and Ilsa. Every direct reference to their affair had to go. And here is the most beautiful irony of the entire story. By stripping away all that explicitness, Breen accidentally made the film more powerful. Because now Rick and Ilsa could not just say what they felt. They had to communicate it through a glance, a pause, a line about remembering every detail. The Germans wore gray, you wore blue. Audiences felt the electricity between those two people without being told it was there. The censorship created the subtext, and the subtext created the magic. When Casablanca finally premiered on November 26, 1942 in New York, it was not because Warner Brothers had decided they had made a masterpiece. It was because the Allied forces had just invaded French North Africa. Casablanca was suddenly on the front page of every newspaper in America. The studio rushed the release to ride the wave of attention. The stars were not even there. Bogart was afraid of flying and stayed in California. Bergman was on Broadway in another show. A few studio executives and New York socialites attended. Nobody that night had any idea they were watching history. The film did decent business but was not an immediate sensation. It ranked 7th in box office for 1943. The biggest movie that year earned almost 3 times what Casablanca made. But something was happening slowly underneath those numbers. People were talking about it, recommending it, going back to see it a second time, then a third. By early 1944, Casablanca had received 8 Oscar nominations. It won 3: Best Picture, Best Director for Kurtis, the Hungarian man who once asked for a poodle and got a dog. And Best Adapted Screenplay, which is remarkable when you consider the script was being written in real time, with the ending undecided and pages arriving on set every morning still warm. The film lived on. It grew. It became something bigger than any of the people who made it ever imagined it could be. But it only became that because of what was removed. The deleted scenes. The censored moments. The forbidden footage. Because what you take away from a story is sometimes more powerful than what you leave in. Humphrey Bogart walking into that jail cell with greed in his eyes would have told us exactly who Rick was. And we would have believed it. And we would have lost something we did not even know we needed. The mystery. The possibility. The hope that somewhere underneath that perfectly pressed white jacket was a man who still gave a damn. They buried that scene. And in doing so, they set Rick Blaine free to become the man the world needed him to be. Some secrets, it turns out, are worth keeping. And some deleted scenes were deleted for all the right reasons.